Hello everyone, my name is Beatrice Palmieri and I'm a student from the Department of Classical Philology and Italian Studies at the University of Bologna. I accomplished my Erasmus training within the Our Mythical Childhood project at the Faculty of Artes Liberales, University of Warsaw last year, under the supervision of Mrs. Marciniak, whom I want to thank for giving me the opportunity to participate in this wonderful project and to share with you my research. In this presentation, titled Gianni Rodari and the Myth of Atalanta, the Role of Nature in Knowledge of Culture, I would like to introduce you to the myth of Atalanta in its reworking by Gianni Rodari. The year 2020 marked the centenary of the birth of Gianni Rodari, who might be considered the most famous and loved author for children of the 20th century in Italy.
He is probably best known for the Grammatica della Fantasia, the Grammar of Fantasy, or Favole al Telefono, the Telephone Tales, which have been translated in many countries. Less known, instead, is the short novel about which I'm going to discuss today. The title is Atalanta, a maiden in Greece of gods and heroes. It is interesting to point out that, among Rodari's numerous masterpieces, Atalanta stands out as the only book that entirely engages the world of Greek mythology. Published in 1982 with the beautiful illustration of Emanuele Luzzati, Atalanta is a children's novel in which the author recounts the myth of the Arcadian heroine by combining his characteristic fervent imagination with a reworking of the raw material of the myth, often deciding not to follow the known chronological order of the events or to omit problematical parts, such as Atalanta's rape. The protagonist of this story is Atalanta, daughter of King Iasus of Arcadia, who is repudiated at birth and abandoned on a mountain by order of her father, who desired a male heir to the throne. Little Atalanta is saved and suckled by a she-bear and is brought up under Diana's watchful gaze. She grows up in contact with nature, observing the sky and learning to read the language of nature. After entering the Sylvian court of Diana, she becomes a capable hunter like her female companions, with whom she lives widely in the woods, away from any contact with human settlements. Sometimes she finds herself spying on them from a distance, but she never feels the desire to go and live among men in houses that seem to her as a prison, especially after finding out that one of these men killed Britomarti, her companion and friend. The only desire she has now is to avenge her friend's death. She wants to humiliate men and decides to do it by taking part in the Caledonian boar hunt. The main character in this first phase of Atalanta's life is Diana, goddess of wild nature and children. The conversation she has with Atalanta before the girl leaves for Caledon is significant. Diana says, "You don't know men, they are capable of being evil sometimes. You were born among them, even if they repudiated you. It is right that you measure yourself with them. Go, I'll set you free." Free? But I will come back to you. This is where I want to live. Will you come back? I don't know. You will decide. I set you free. You can come back or stay. If you find that there are better things than hunting and more beautiful than the woods you grew up in, follow them. I'll be back, says Atalanta. So Atalanta lives only to take revenge on men, convinced that she would return to a natural life that is her home. But she doesn't know that she sets out on a journey of discovering the world of man, a metaphor of growth and progress towards maturity. Thus comes the time for Atalanta to confront the world of man. She travels to King Oeneus' court for the Caledonian boar hunt, and there she is welcomed as the only woman among the hunters, favored by the young prince Meleager, who shows a certain attraction towards this mysterious stranger. Without too much effort, Atalanta excels and not only manages to complete her revenge plan, but also experiences love for the first time. she falls in love with Meleager. So the hunt also becomes an opportunity to get to know love. Alongside Meleager, Atalanta forgets revenge and has a feeling of sympathy towards the young man, but she realizes too late that she is in love with him. According to the myth, Meleager lives with the Argonauts after the boar hunt, but here Rodari intervenes with his fantastic magic wand and lets poor Meleager die, so that Atalanta can experience a moment of further growth, the pain of the death of a loved one. With her curious and adventurous soul, modeled on the teachings of nature, Atalanta faces the world of man, made of suffering, pain, but also joy, friendship, and love. This way, Atalanta enters the bastion of Minerva, goddess of wisdom and culture. Furthermore, Rodari entrusts to this moment of the myth a very important task. He wants to oppose the social and cultural beliefs according to which being a woman is a sign of inferiority, as is growing up in wild conditions, different from the established norms. Indeed, Atalanta is the living proof that these two factors, femininity and wildness, are not a weakness. On the contrary, they become significant strength. The fact of coming from the world of Diana gives Atalanta the practical means to be able to sustain such a grueling hunt, and the fact of being the only woman among men makes her triumph even more memorable. The story is combined here with the myth of the Argonauts, which allows the plot to unfold in other adventures for the heroine. She travels alongside Jason and Hercules in search of the Golden Fleece and arrives at the royal court in Colchis. Here she witnesses the exploits of Jason, obligated to conquer the Golden Fleece, and gets acquainted with Medea, who asks her to help her deceive her father in order to save the hero she's in love with. Atalanta refuses to be complicit in this deception. I will learn everything there is to be learned, but not deception, she says. At the same time, some news from the world in which she grew up causes a burning disappointment. Diana punished two companions, Callisto and Titana, transforming them into a bear and a deer respectively. Comparing this ruthlessness to the generosity of Hercules, who frees Prometheus from the suffering he was condemned to, Atalanta makes a decision that will change her life forever. After numerous adventures, indeed, the time finally comes to make the choice. Return to the woods, as she promised Diana, or stay in the world of Minerva? Well, she will never return to the woods, choosing to remain among men. A new adventure awaits Atalanta, that of taking care of her old father. Here, Rodari faithfully follows the myth, adding a moral to this tale consistent with all his own narrative. The author imagines an encounter between Atalanta and the father who had abandoned her as a crowning moment of all her experiences. She doesn't resent her father. On the contrary, she thinks that had she grown up at court, safe among toys and fairy tales, she would now be an ordinary princess, able to cook and embroider. Instead, she knows how to use the bow, and she had the chance to meet Meleager, Theseus, and Hercules. Otherwise, what would she have known about man? Nothing. By saying this, Atalanta makes clear that the role of nature in her path towards maturity has been fundamental. Her personality was first shaped on the teachings of nature, which means that she could learn by herself how to make room for herself in the world without anyone presuming to teach her the role she had to play. She didn't experience the life at court, which would have meant that somebody imparted a morality from top to bottom, precluding her from a personal discovery of the world. By this, Rodari seems to state that he has faith in children's natural ability to create their own values, trusting in their skills to build them and use them. Thus, put at ease and left free to imagine a world more suited to them, they can build their own identity by themselves. Eventually, even marriage, which Atalanta accepts to please her old father, becomes a symbolic issue. Atalanta sets her condition. Only somebody who beats her in a race will be allowed to marry her. An ominous mood defines this decision. At this moment, indeed, the conflict between the young adventurous girl she is and the woman she is becoming is over. The latter wins. The running race allows Atalanta to return for one last time to the times when, as a child, she ran free in the woods. After that, the transition from childhood to adulthood takes place. However, we shouldn't think that this moment marks the symbolical death of the young and wild girl. Atalanta will always be the courageous and free soul she has been in her childhood. A part of her will always belong to the world of Diana, and this is the reason why she's different from other princesses. The myth of Atalanta is reworked by Rodari in order to create a coming-of-age story in line with his most dear ideals. These ideals can be expressed in one word: democracy, which in those years, the 70s and 80s, was significantly gaining importance in Italy, also in the world of school, where social differences were deeply pronounced. Rodari was a strong proponent of this renewal. As he stated, the sense of utopia will one day be recognized as one of the human senses, on par with sight, hearing, smell, etc. In anticipation of that day, it is up to fairy tales to keep it alive and to use it to scrutinize the fantastic universe. His utopia can in all probability be ascribed to the name of the heroine whom he has chosen for protagonist of the only book set in the time of the myth, timeless par excellence and hence always present. Atalanta, indeed, derives from the Greek word atalantos, meaning equal in weight, which may certainly refer to the protagonist's ability to excel in various contests with men, but it may also be interpreted as a dream of radical change in adult society. Also, the meaning of Atalantos can be read as an advice for the child who is inside each of us, that is to seek the right balance between nature and culture, wilderness and wisdom. Diana and Minerva should have the same weight in shaping our personality. In the end, I think this story could also be read in terms of ecofeminism. All the adventures Atalanta has gone through, exactly because they went against the unquestioned tradition of a male-dominated society, allowed her to become the woman she wanted to be, authentic and without pretense. And the role of nature is deeply significant in this path. She managed to reach this condition thanks to the fact that she grew up in wild and natural environment, far from a world that presumes to be civilized but hides forms of discrimination. Ecofeminism states that there is a parallel between the marginalization of women in the patriarchal society and the downgrading of everything that comes from the world of nature. It emphasizes that both must be respected. And Rodari seems to suggest that just by respecting both woman and nature, we could reach a more democratic society. The author usually enjoys desecrating cliches, and in this book he does so by freeing his imagination in the terrain of myth. He invites readers from a young age to free themselves from the patterns and prejudice that concern, in this specific case, the themes of gender and ecology. With the story of Atalanta, Rodari highlights that a different culture can be built based on respect for femininity and wildness, and a different world where everyone is left free to define itself in a natural way is possible, not only in myth, but also in reality. Thank you for your attention.